Florida. We're live on YouTube, Blake Harris Law, Instagram, Blake Harris Law, TikTok, Blake Harris Law. If you have any questions, fire away, and I will start with the first one that's popped in, which is, how do I protect my money from lawsuits? Great question. There's more than one way to skin a cat. My strategy for protecting my assets is to use a Cook Islands trust, and this is the strategy that I recommend to most of my clients. The reason I like a Cook Islands trust is it is the best and strongest form of asset protection available. Next question we have is, why not use a domestic trust? There are domestic trusts and there are offshore trusts. The benefit of a domestic trust is it's probably going to be simpler and cost you less to set up a domestic trust. However, there have been several failures of domestic trust, and by using a domestic trust, in my opinion, you're gambling with your money. It's the reason I use an offshore trust for my own assets. I'm not going to be gambling with my money, and I'm certainly not going to be gambling with my client's money. There have been several failures of domestic-only trust. Plaintiff attorneys know this. They are much more aggressive about going after a domestic trust. If you want the greatest security, greatest peace of mind of your assets, you use an offshore trust. The mistake I see lots of clients make is they will operate a domestic trust. They will save a few $1,000s up front, but this ends up costing them hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars in leverage in the long run. Next, why not use a trust that can be moved overseas later? So set up a domestic trust, and then in the event that a lawsuit hits, transfer that to an overseas trust later. Some planning is better than no planning. However, there is no guarantee that in the time of crisis, a trust company is going to step in to serve as trustee. There's no guarantee that you're going to be able to open a bank account if you wait until a lawsuit has begun. By setting up the plan overseas from the beginning, you give yourself the best protection and you give yourself the best settlement leverage. Keep in mind that an offshore trust, it is almost always used as a tool for negotiating a settlement. If you've injured someone and you've legitimately caused some harm, you should compensate them appropriately. You don't have your back against the wall where you don't have any leverage if they're being unreasonable. Now, if someone brings a BS claim against you, you can tell them to go pound sand if you have your assets secured inside of an offshore trust. Why the Cook Islands over another country? So there are three main jurisdictions which have good, solid, codified asset protection trust laws. These include the Cook Islands, Belize, and Nevis. Belize is famous for their zero look-back period. However, in Belize, there's a general lack of stability with the government and the banks down there, which make me hesitant to use Belize as my first choice for an asset protection trust. Nevis has a very good law. They essentially copied the Cook Islands Asset Protection Trust Law, and they added a bond requirement of $100,000 in order to bring a case, which has successfully deterred just about anyone from going to litigate against the Nevis Trust. However, the mindset of the government in Nevis is not as defendant-friendly. It's not as interested in protecting the asset protection business as the Cook Islands. Nevis makes a lot of money from selling passports. Cook Islands does not sell passports. They are heavily invested in ensuring that their asset protection business remains intact. On top of that, the Cook Islands has been in the business longer than anybody else, and the increased distance from the U.S. decreases the chance that somebody's going to go litigate over a Cook Islands trust. How long does it take to set up a trust? From the time a client submits payment until the time that that trust is established and ready to be funded, it typically takes about 30 days, provided we're receiving prompt communication from the client. So from the time the client submits payment until the time the trust is established and ready to begin the funding process, it typically takes about 30 days. Will I still have access to my money? Absolutely. With a Cook Islands trust, you can request a distribution. You can take money out anytime you want, provided that you haven't been ordered by a court. If you're ordered by a court and you're acting under duress, the trustee won't distribute money to you. But any other time you want money, you'll be able to get it out of the trust. You can also direct how the money is invested. If you ever want to dissolve the trust, you can also dissolve the trust, and the trust can be amended as well. What if a judge orders me to bring my money back? Rule number one, you always comply with court orders. Rule number two, you never lie. So if a court orders you to bring the money back, you will comply to the best of your ability with the court request. So you will request that the money is returned. However, the trustee is going to require you to sign an affidavit under penalty of perjury promising that you are not being ordered by a court. A court cannot order you to perjure yourself. And in the absence of a sworn affidavit saying that you are requesting the funds by your own request, the trustee sitting over in the Cook Islands is not going to send that money back. So you'll be in compliance with the court orders, but your money will remain protected. What assets can I protect? Pretty much any asset you own can be protected. Cash, stocks, bonds, very easy to protect. We'll help you open up an offshore account. Typically, we use the Swiss banks. You will then have the trustee own that account. For cryptocurrency, there's a few different ways to hold cryptocurrency. It can be held at a bank. There's a couple of banks in Switzerland that will allow you to keep cryptocurrency with them. You could also put it in a cold storage vault, ideally somewhere outside of the United States. Or in certain circumstances, you can even self-custody your crypto, which the trust owns. For real estate, you can put that into the trust, and that is going to be a very helpful tool in keeping it protected. It's even better if you can equity strip that real estate, meaning place a lien against the real estate and then take those proceeds and put them in an overseas account. Next question, how is the trust taxed? It is a tax neutral vehicle. It does not increase your taxes. It does not decrease your taxes. You are required to report to the IRS and FinCEN if you have an offshore account or an offshore bank account. As a client of Blake Harris Law, we provide our clients with a detailed tax memorandum which explains how to complete all of their offshore reporting requirements. On top of that, if your CPA is not comfortable completing those offshore reporting requirements with the memorandum we also provide a list of CPAs who are able to complete those offshore reporting requirements. Will I get audited if I set up an offshore trust? And the answer is it does not increase your chances of an audit. The way that the IRS calculates whether someone is going to be audited, they do not add points if you're creating an offshore trust. Have you ever been to the Cook Islands? Absolutely. I was just there a few months ago. I met with pretty much every trust company in the Cook Islands. Which trust companies do you work with? I have relationships with several different trust companies. The two that I do the most business with are Southpac, short for South Pacific, and Aura. You can go on my YouTube channel and you can watch an interview where I am speaking with the manager of Southpac in one interview and where I'm speaking with the manager of Aura in another interview. Which Swiss banks do you work with? Well, I'm not going to be able to name any Swiss banks because the banks don't like when we go on camera and mention their names, and then that will sever the relationship. I will say that I have a relationship with several different registered investment advisors who then work with a dozen or more different banks. The bank that we will recommend is going to depend on several factors, such as your assets. The more assets you have, the more access to a variety of different banks you'll have access to. Also, whether you want crypto and your overall risk exposure. Other than Switzerland, where else can you put your money? You can open up an account pretty much anywhere in the world under a Cook Islands trust. I like Switzerland because it's a very stable banking system. You have access to a wide variety of different investments. You get excellent, crisp customer service. The banks are very stable. Some of them have been around longer than the United States has been around. However, if you want to have an account that you also have inside the United States, you can do that as well. We also have a relationship with a bank out of the Cook Islands, Nevis, Belize. Pretty much anywhere in the world you want to open up an account, it can be opened under your trust. It's beneficial to have at least one account outside of the jurisdiction, the United States typically, where you are concerned about litigation arising, because in the asset protection world, there are two components. There's number one, control, and that's going to be in the hands of a Cook Islands trust company, and then there's physical possession. And we don't want that physical possession to be threatened by a U.S. court, so we'd move it over to a jurisdiction such as Switzerland, which would only recognize a court order from the country which controls that account, which would then be the Cook Islands, where it is extremely hard to get a court order to release assets held by an asset protection trust. Why did you decide to become an asset protection attorney? So I got asked this question a few weeks ago by a potential client. My answer was I thought I could make a lot of money. But there's actually a little bit more to this story. Back when I was in kindergarten, we had a rule where the teacher our parents would give us $1 each morning, and then we'd bring it to school, and you'd pay that $1 for your lunch. I noticed that if you didn't have your $1 as kindergartners, they were still going to feed us. So each day, I just held on to the $1 and forgot it when it came time to purchase our lunch. This went on for about 30 days when my teacher contacted my parents and said, have you not been giving Blake any money, or you need to make sure that Blake has his lunch money? And they say, what are you talking about? Well, the next day I get to school, and they had gone into my personal cubby and taken about $30 from me, which as a kindergartner was a lot of money. And I think that's what really woke me up. That's when the light switch went on to realize, if you're going to be accumulating wealth, you need to learn how to protect it. So how did I learn to do what I do? How did I learn about asset protection and Cook Islands Trust? It's certainly something that they do not teach in law school. Shortly out of law school, I was working for a trust law firm based in Colorado, and then soon thereafter started my own law practice. My office was about 3 blocks away from Barry Engel's office. Barry Engel is a U.S. attorney that wrote the Cook Islands Trust legislation, and I learned a lot from Barry Engel about the Cook Islands asset protection, about offshore asset protection. I attended many of his CLEs. We worked together on a variety of different clients. I read his comprehensive book on asset protection. Unfortunately, Barry passed away a few years ago, but before he passed away, I learned all about the business from Barry Engel. And then I went on to go and meet with the various trust companies in Cook Islands, Nevis, and Belize, and meet with the bankers in Switzerland and Nevis and Belize and the Cook Islands. And I continue to grow my network so that when clients need asset protection solutions, I have a global network which very few other law firms worldwide can offer for clients looking for asset protection. How do you protect real estate? A couple of different options for protecting real estate. One, you can sell the real estate and then protect those funds. Number two, you put the real estate into the trust. Once the real estate's into the trust, you cannot be ordered to hand it over. Now, there is the possibility that a court may not recognize the trust, a U.S. court, and still seize that real estate. So if you want to better protect the real estate, what you will also do is equity strip that real estate. Take a loan against that real estate, take the equity out of that real estate, put that equity into an offshore bank account, and then once the money's in the offshore bank account, it's safe from U.S. court. With real estate, when you equity strip it, you can use a domestic lender or an offshore lender. On top of that, you can also rely on any homestead protection. For example, in Florida and Colorado, your home is fully protected, subject to certain acreage limitation. How do I know the foreign trustee is safe? The Cook Islands trust companies are better regulated and supervised than U.S.-based trust companies. The asset protection business, as I mentioned, is vital to the success of the Cook Islands economy. I've been to the Cook Islands. I've met with the owners, the managers, the frontline employees at these companies. These companies manage literally tens of billions of dollars in assets. I have the ability to remove every single client that I've sent to these companies. I have the ability to stop sending any future business to these clients and probably get other attorneys who send them business to stop sending them business as well. These companies, and not to mention if they did something inappropriate, they could face jail time in their home country as well. These companies are far more incentivized to do exactly as we want them to do than they are to do anything else with the assets. When you create an offshore trust, you are joining a league of some very wealthy, powerful individuals. I get asked the question sometimes is, well, do you think it could become illegal for U.S. individuals to set up an offshore trust? And I say unlikely, because the people who are writing the laws are the ones utilizing offshore trusts as well. Which brings me to the next question, which is a great question, which is what is the most common misconception with asset protection? And this is the most common misconception. Asset protection is only for the super wealthy. This is not true, and I'm going to illustrate it with a quick example. Client A has $1 million. Client B has $100 million. Both of them get sued for $5 million. My client with $100 million, I'm going to say, do not offer any settlement, hire the best attorneys in the world, fight it as hard as you can, and if you end up losing, $5 million is really not going to have any significant effect on your standard of living or quality of life. Now, the individual with just $1 million, I'm going to say, you've got to talk settlement, and you've got to talk settlement fast. If you get hit with a $5 million judgment, that's going to have significant effects on your standard of living and quality of life. The majority of individuals and families who seek my services have between $1 and $10 million in assets. Can you protect cryptocurrency in an asset protection trust? Yes, absolutely. As I mentioned previously, you can either use a bank, a safe vault, or you can utilize a self-custody, or you can self-custody your crypto. What is a trust protector? So a trust protector is an individual or company that is named in the trust document. They're not the trustee. They're not the grantor, you the client or the grantor. They're not the beneficiary, you the client or the beneficiary. But they have a limited role, and their role consists of doing typically only one of two things. With the consent of the trustee, amending the trust if we ever want to or desire to change the terms of the trust. We also have the trust protector also has the very limited but important power to fire the trustee and appoint a new trustee. Why would a trustee ever need to be fired? Number one, if we were ever just concerned about the trustee, that's never been an issue, certainly never for one of my clients. But if we're ever concerned that a plaintiff is going to go and successfully get into the trust in the Cook Islands, the trust protector gives us the flexibility to move the trust to a new location and then require the plaintiff to start their legal battle over again in a new country. We're going to have to find new counsel, post an upfront retainer because most of these countries do not allow cases to be brought on a contingency fee. They require expensive, hefty bonds to be posted. It gives us the ability to tell someone bringing a lawsuit, you can do one of two things. You can chase this trust all around the world and continue to spend and spend forever and never get paid, or you can take our settlement offer. Are offshore trusts legal? Yes, absolutely. When done properly, it is just as legal as driving your car down the street to create an offshore trust. Offshore trust industry has been around for, well, by many regards, centuries, but at least since the Cook Islands passed their asset protection trust law back in the 80s. For over 40 years, it's been around. Is a retirement plan protected? Certain types of retirement plans come with a certain level of protection already. 401ks, IRAs, pension plans. It depends on your state, the level of protection that you receive, and the size of the account. Generally, smaller accounts, $500,000 or less, are better protected. When you have a retirement plan that a judge could rule is excessively funded, it has more than what you could need for your retirement there, it may lose some protection, and there are some strategies that can be used to further protect a retirement plan. But we do not put a retirement plan directly into a trust, because if it's a qualified retirement plan, then what ends up happening is you could lose the tax benefits of that retirement plan if you put it directly into a trust. So instead you can place it in, perhaps place the retirement plan funds invested into an LLC that comes with a level of protection. What is an asset protection trust? So an asset protection trust is simply a trust which includes a spendthrift provision, which means that a creditor is not allowed to take money out of the trust. So if somebody gets a judgment against one of the beneficiaries of the trust, the asset protection trust prevents the money in the trust from being paid out to someone who sues them. What is an irrevocable life insurance trust? So it is a trust which you place life insurance proceeds into. With this type of trust, it's often used for estate tax planning because it can reduce the amount that you have to eat up of your lifetime or death gift and estate transfers. So you have a certain amount of money that you can give away. By using a life insurance trust, it increases the amount that you can give away and avoid any estate tax. It can also be used as a great tool for asset protection. If you have life insurance, you give it to a trust. It's an irrevocable trust. You set it up before there's any litigation. It gets it off your balance sheet. It's not something that you'd be able to access anyways. You can continue to make a gift each year to continue to fund that life insurance trust, and then when you die, that money pays out to your beneficiaries, and it can do that outside of your estate. What is an offshore trust? It is a trust that is established under the laws of a country other than the United States. For example, a Cook Islands trust is an offshore trust because it is established under the laws of the Cook Islands. What are the benefits of creating an offshore trust? There are several benefits to creating an offshore trust. Of course, number one is asset protection. It keeps your property protected from lawsuits. Number two, it also operates as an estate planning trust so that the assets inside of the trust, they avoid probate, and then they can also be passed to your children, your beneficiaries, in a way that it is protected for them as well so that they don't lose it due to a divorce or a lawsuit as well. Another benefit of an offshore trust is it can open you up to more investment opportunities that you as a U.S. individual do not have access to yourself. And finally, an offshore trust is a good tool for avoiding or mitigating political turmoil in your home country. Should I get a prenup? Well, other than the risk of upsetting your future spouse, a prenup is probably a wise thing to have. Planning while the waters are calm makes a lot of sense. It can save a lot of headache down the road, so both of you have the same expectations as to what happens to your property. However, prenups are frequently disregarded, and I would not recommend relying on a prenup alone. If you're concerned about protection from a marriage going the wrong direction, an offshore trust is going to be a much more effective tool for keeping your assets protected. Is an offshore trust irrevocable? Is an offshore trust irrevocable? Typically, yes, an offshore trust is an irrevocable trust. However, irrevocable does not mean inflexible. It's a very flexible tool. You can add or remove property, the trust can be amended, it can be dissolved as well. How do you charge your clients and how do you take payment? All of my work is done on a flat fee. Once you become a client of my law firm, you have open access to myself and my team. We don't bill you for phone calls and emails. We do require our payment to be made up front. We take credit card, check, wire, and crypto. What's your favorite country you have traveled to? So it depends on what part of the countries you're traveling to. Belize has some very amazing parts that I like, but I would say Cook Islands is incredibly amazing. If you can make it to one of the smaller islands, Atutaki is a very cool place, one of the coolest places I've seen on Earth. Nevis, though, Nevis is my favorite. I'm actually heading back to Nevis in about a couple of months and taking my kids for the first time. They're both very excited about it. There will be no work going on while I'm there during that trip. Who needs asset protection the most? So there's a few different factors in determining who needs asset protection. Number one is asset level. The more assets you have, the more exposed you are to lawsuits, within the realm of over $1 million to $10 million being where most people who need asset protection. Also, your risk exposure. If you're a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, a real estate or cryptocurrency investor, you're at an increased risk for being sued, so therefore would benefit the most from asset protection. And finally, it's risk tolerance. How much would it stress you if you got sued? If you were being sued, would it cause you to lose sleep at night? Would it bring stress into your home or marital life? Would it distract you from running your business? If so, you'd be a prime candidate for asset protection. Does Trump need asset protection? Well, let's do a quick analysis. Does he have assets? He's got quite a few assets to protect. Does he have risk exposure? Yes, he's got a lot of risk exposure. He's involved in many different businesses and the target of a lot of media attention. Does he have a high risk tolerance? Well, at his age, if he were to lose a significant chunk of his wealth to a lawsuit, he doesn't have a lot of time to recuperate those losses. So in that regard, he would need asset protection. However, he recently got indicted, and being under an indictment, you're not a good candidate for setting up an asset protection plan. Had he wanted to do this planning 10, 20 years ago, then yes, asset protection would have been great for him, but the optics of the situation are such that I don't think he's going to find any trust company who's willing to work with him at this point in time. What is the flaw in Andrew Tate's asset protection plan? So Andrew Tate talks a lot about having multiple passports, having many different bank accounts around the world, which are both helpful tools in putting together an asset protection plan. But if Andrew personally controls all of those bank accounts himself, he could be ordered to pay them all out. What he's missing is an asset protection trust to own those bank accounts. That way, if the court orders him to hand over his assets, he can say, I don't have the ability to do that. Should Biden set up an offshore trust? He's been in politics long enough that I assume he has quite a few assets. He's definitely in a position of some risk where someone may want to target a lawsuit, does not have a lot of time to recuperate his funds. However, as the President of the United States, as a sitting President of the United States, you are supposed to be a believer in our legal system. And setting up an offshore trust is kind of saying, I don't trust the American judicial system. So I don't think it would be appropriate for Biden to set up an offshore asset protection trust. What is the price to set up an offshore trust? So the price to set up an offshore trust at minimum is going to run around $10,000. The highest asset protection trusts run for around maybe $150,000. On top of that, annual maintenance runs anywhere from around $5,000 to around $35,000 per year. Typical price for an offshore asset protection trust, though, runs somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000 to set up and $5,000 to $10,000 per year to maintain. Is an offshore trust revocable or irrevocable? Typically, an offshore trust is irrevocable. How does Blake protect his assets? How do I protect my assets? I practice what I preach. I have an offshore asset protection trust. It owns both an offshore account and a domestic account. What state is Blake licensed in? I'm licensed in both Florida and Colorado. However, we work with clients worldwide. Do you have any children? I do have children, but I'm not going to tell you their ages or anything more about them. They're wonderful, happy, and healthy. I'm very blessed in that regard. The downside of creating trust, well, you've got to pay my fee up front, and there are some annual fees associated with paying your annual fee. Trust. Besides the cost, there's some paperwork you have to sign off on, but after the trust is initially established, it's a pretty smooth sailing. It gives you peace of mind going forward. How did you become an authority in your field? Well, really specializing, I think, for me, as opposed to being an attorney who tries to do car accidents and divorces and all kinds of different areas of law. I have narrowed my practice to doing exclusively offshore asset protection. And in doing that, I've had time to research and write on the subject. I've written many articles. I've wrote several books on this subject. I frequently teach continuing education. And on top of that, I go and I meet with the people who I do business with internationally very, very frequently. How did you become a social media influencer? Well, I posted some videos on social media that the algorithms have liked, and I've continued to post on it, and it's been a great way for me to learn from other creators. It's been a great way for me to find more clients and teach the world more about asset protection planning. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? We're going to continue to do exactly what we're doing. I'm continuing to build what I consider to be the best network of professionals to help keep my clients' assets protected. How important is good health? I'm going to steal a line from Gary Vee, which is, well, if you're dead, you're out of business. Health is very important. I try to start every single day by being active. Family is most important. I find all the most professional, most successful people put their family first. How important are friends? Friends are very important. They're the cake of life. What advice do you have to someone in college? What skills would you recommend someone who's in college develop? Learn to talk to people. Learn to talk to people of different ages, from different backgrounds. If you haven't read the book How to Win Friends and Influence People, there's other books that talk more about how to be a good communicator. Communication is a skill, and it can get you very far if you are a good communicator. And the best way to do it is practice. The lesson that your parents taught you of don't talk to a stranger on the bus was not a good lesson. It was a good lesson when you were 6 years old, but when you're 21 years old, it's not a good lesson. Talk to people around you. The more you talk, ask questions. Also, stay out of trouble. Avoid things that will get you addicted or arrested. If someone wants to work for you, what should they do? You can send me a resume. Blake@blakeharrislaw.com is my email address. Make sure it's properly formatted. Make sure you don't have any spelling mistakes. I don't care about your experience. I just want to see how you can present yourself. Would you ever run for political office? Politicians have a lot of power to help a lot of people, and I really like that ideal. I've been an outspoken advocate that our legal system is broken, and it would be great if the politicians were to fix it. However, as a politician, you have to really pander to the masses, and pandering to anyone is really not my style. Where did you go to school, and what did you study? I'm a double Florida Gator, University of Florida. I undergraduate majored in finance and for law school, and then I went to law school there as well. Most interesting way you met a client. Actually hanging out at the one hotel in South Beach, sitting at the bar, I met a client whose net worth was around $500 million. If you could have dinner with any person, well, my children would be my first choice. My grandfathers on both sides would be my second choice. Beyond that, Satoshi Nakamoto would be a very interesting one to have dinner with. Greatest strength, going back to what I said, is great for college students to learn. I consider it one of my strengths. I've been exposed to a lot of different people throughout my life, and the ability to communicate is something I'm very blessed with. Do you have a CPA, financial advisor, trust company protector that I can recommend? Absolutely. As a client of mine, we open you up to our worldwide Rolodex of CPAs, financial advisors, trust companies, and protectors. Do you have a marketing team? I have a website marketing, an internet marketing team, Connective Web Design, managed by an individual named Rodney Warren. I've been working with him for about 10 years. Highly recommend them. Do you have a secure portal for communicating with clients? Absolutely. We utilize MyCase, which has military-grade security. Do you recommend setting up a Nevis LLC? Sometimes. In my opinion, a Nevis LLC does not add much in terms of protection. It does increase costs. It does make the plan more complex. The benefit of a Nevis LLC, though, is it gives the client the ability to be the direct signer on the account, which many clients insist or want to have. Do you offer a bulletproof trust? Now, as an attorney, we cannot make guarantees about the success of our planning. However, I will say that we've never had a penny taken out of any of our trust, and with a properly structured Cook Islands trust, there's never been any successful attack on a properly structured Cook Islands Asset Protection Trust. Our Cayman Islands Trust is useful for asset protection. So as I've mentioned, the 3 jurisdictions which I would recommend most for asset protection: Cook Islands, Nevis, and Belize. Cayman Islands, it's better than a domestic trust in some regards because it does still require someone to go litigate overseas, but there's no codified asset protection trust law in the Cayman Islands, so it's not a jurisdiction that I would generally recommend for asset protection planning. What makes an attorney a great attorney? So there's a few different factors that go into make an attorney a good attorney. Number one is an attorney who's specialized, an attorney who's knowledgeable is important. An attorney who is good at communicating. Number one, they're responsive, they respond in a reasonably quick time frame. You understand the way that they communicate, but also an attorney with a large network is important. Compared to having a doctor, if you have a doctor who can work on your foot but knows no other doctors and then another issue arises, then that doctor has to, and you have to start the process over of finding a new doctor, that's kind of a painful process. That's kind of a hard process. An attorney that has a wide network is very important. How do you grow your network? Well, I'm always looking to grow my network, and it's the reason that I travel frequently. It's the reason that I'm very active on social media through LinkedIn and Facebook, not so much Facebook, that's not cool, but through LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, I've met a lot of people by connecting online. Teaching continuing education, I have other people who reach out to me. I make an effort to have a relationship with many of my clients as well, or just generally when I travel, I'll speak next to the person sitting next to me. As I mentioned, it's where I got my best and biggest client was by sitting at the bar at the hotel lobby in Miami. What's my favorite food? I would say if I could have any dish, it would actually be carpaccio, especially at Tavernetta in Denver, which is just about a block away from where my Denver office is. Favorite drink? I'm a fan of sparkling water, perhaps the Liquid Death brand. This is not a paid endorsement, but if Liquid Death wants to mail me a few free sparkling waters, I would not mind. I'm also a bit of a connoisseur of smoothies and an occasional glass of red wine. Favorite comedian? As a child, I listened to every single podcast. I don't know whether we had podcasts as children, but anything I could get from George Carlin. I always liked his comedy. Favorite book? I mentioned it a couple of times already, How to Win Friends and Influence People. It's something that I highly recommend. Are you super frugal? I don't have my wallet right here, but my wallet is a paper binder, a 5-cent paper binder. You could spend $200 on a Gucci wallet, but I was using that 5-cent binder, buying myself a drink recently, and the gentleman sitting a seat over from me, an older gentleman, looks at me and says, I knew one other person who used that as their wallet, and he was a billionaire. Although I do spend a bit to travel, but that's more of a business expense. I don't mind purchasing nice food. I'm very health conscious, but generally I am fairly frugal. What is the best time to create an asset protection trust? You want to get the fire insurance before the fire. If you can set up the asset protection plan before any litigation arises, that's going to be the best strategy for keeping your assets protected. Biggest competition. There are not a lot of other attorneys who really focus on asset protection. Of the ones who focus, there's very few of them who focus exclusively on Cook Island Trust or offshore trust. Of the ones who do, I believe that we do beat them in terms of service. I'd say knowledge is out there. Many of us have it. We consult each other frequently. But in terms of service, if you go online, you're only going to find excellent reviews about my law firm and probably more reviews about my law firm than you will find about any other asset protection focused law firm. Do you create wills and revocable living trust? No, we do not. We focus on offshore asset protection trust. I do recommend you get your wills and revocable living trusts. How many different trusts are there? There's no limit to the number of different trusts. Every single day, trust attorneys are cooking up new names and making up new names for a trust agreement. You could classify every trust as either a revocable or an irrevocable, and then within that irrevocable category, there's tax-based trust, there are revocable trust and irrevocable trust. Within the irrevocable trust, there are irrevocable trusts which are used for qualifying for Medicaid, which my law firm does not do. There are tax is used for reducing your estate tax, which my firm also does not do, but we can put you in touch with another attorney who can help with that. And then there are asset protection trusts. Within the asset protection trust, you have your domestic asset protection trust and you have your offshore asset protection trust. And then attorneys are constantly making up new names for the various types of trusts, and they can tweak them a little bit as well. Have you ever written a book? Yes, I've written a couple of books on the subject. If you go to my website, BlakeHarrisLaw.com, click on the attorney page, scroll down, you can see a list of my publications. You can also go on Amazon and find one of the books. Typical response time. Pretty much anytime someone contacts us, by the end of the next business day, we'll have a response, typically the same business day, and usually even within a few hours. I try to be very responsive in my team. I've also trained to be extremely responsive. How do I get an initial consultation? Give me a call. The number's on my website, BlakeHarrisLaw.com, or fill out a contact form and someone from my law firm will contact you initially. How does the initial call go? So I'm going to ask you, is your net worth over $1 million? If it's under $1 million but close, we can assist you. If the net worth is under $250,000, we may not be able to assist you. Also, I'm going to ask about any pending litigations. How do I hire Blake Harris Law? You're going to have to sign our engagement agreement. It's a few pages long, and then we're going to need payment. Will I work with Blake or his staff? A client of Blake Harris Law, you will be assisted by other members of my staff during the process. However, if you ever would like to speak to me, I will always make myself available for a client. Do I get to meet Blake once we've been hired? If you and I are ever in the same town, I would love to meet you. Can you protect assets from divorce? Yes, we protect from any type of litigation, including divorce. Do you teach continuing education to other attorneys or professionals? Yes, very frequently. I'd say I may have had dozens of different continuing education classes I've taught. You can go to my website and see many of the places I have taught. Can I protect a retirement account? Retirement accounts already come with some level of protection. I've already answered that question. Do you work in Belize? Yes, I was actually just in Belize about a week ago meeting with one of the trust companies I work with out of Belize. Yes, I work in Nevis. I've been there twice in the last 6 months. And yes, I of course work and have been to the Cook Islands. Is an asset protection trust created for me or for me and my spouse? It's up to you. You can create it just for yourself, or you can create it for you and your spouse. What's the difference between an asset protection trust and an offshore trust? An offshore trust is merely a type of asset protection trust. So asset protection trust, there can be a domestic asset protection trust, but we don't like those because those have failed. And then there's the offshore trust, and we like those because they are much more protective. Biggest mistake parents can make, not forcing your children to be outside enough. Also, not giving them enough challenges. Wealthy parents can give your children all kinds of advantages in life, but if you enable them, that can be a huge disadvantage. How will AI change your job? You know, the legal profession is always being threatened with this new technology is going to eliminate your job. And yes, technology, the internet, very much changed the practice of law. My area of the law is very much a relationship-based business, and I don't see how AI is going to be replace the relationship side of the business. But technology is going to help and hurt all of us in many ways, and it's going to be interesting to see how AI does that. Can you juggle? So you've been watching a few of my videos. Yes, sometimes I will juggle. I don't have anything to juggle right now. Okay, so what's the most common asset the clients seek to protect offshore? Cash, stocks, bonds, liquid assets. How do offshore trusts differ from onshore trusts? Offshore trusts are much more protective. Can you give an example of a recent case where offshore asset protection was successfully utilized? So Tom was a client of mine that ran a trucking business for about 20 years. As he neared retirement, he found someone who bought the business for $12 million. Shortly after he bought the business, shortly after he sold the business, a new buyer, the new owner who didn't start the business from scratch, managed to run the business into the ground or almost into the ground. The new owner sought to undo the transaction and claimed that there was an improper disclosure, lack of disclosure when the purchase was complete. The new owner sued my client for $12 million. This was going to leave my client in debt because he had to share a portion of those proceeds with the IRS. Thanks to the offshore trust, my client was able to successfully negotiate a settlement for $175,000, pennies on the dollar. What's the most common mistake you see clients mistake when it comes to offshore asset protection? Waiting too long. The farther in advance of the lawsuit you create the trust, the better protection you will receive. What's the most unusual asset you've seen a client seek to protect offshore? Recently had a client who was interested in protecting an emu farm. So they were looking to file some liens against the emus so that they could not be lost in a lawsuit. How do offshore asset protection laws differ from country to country? So every single country has different asset protection laws. There's different look-back periods for how long it can take for the assets to actually receive protection. There's also different exceptions for which creditors can come in. And the laws in all the different countries are constantly changing, as are banking relations. The asset protection business is an evolving one. And that's why you want to work with a professional who specializes in this field so that as the laws change, they're not worried about updating power of attorney documents or going to court for a divorce. They're focused just on the offshore asset protection industry. How do you advise clients on balancing asset protection with tax obligations? So as I mentioned, the structure itself is tax neutral. It's not increase nor decrease your taxes. If you have an estate that's more than $10 million, if you're an individual, or $20 million as a married couple, as a client of ours, we'll also set you up with another attorney who specializes in tax planning that can help mitigate estate taxes. What's the biggest challenge you face when helping clients with offshore asset protection? Well, potential clients, we do have to get them comfortable with working with an overseas trustee, and I explained to them that I've been to the Cook Islands, I've met with these companies, I know their owners, their managers, their frontline employees. In many cases, I've met many members of their family as well. They're also very well regulated and supervised. Beyond that, responsiveness, clients sometimes can be a little bit slow to sign up on some documents, but many clients are very motivated to get their asset protection in place quickly. Can you explain the process of setting up an offshore trust in just 3 words? Protect your money. What's the most important thing clients should know about offshore asset protection? It's legal and effective. If a client has assets in multiple countries, how do you recommend they approach offshore asset protection? Your offshore trust can own assets anywhere in the world. If a client is concerned about future legal action, what step can they take now to protect their assets offshore? Create an offshore trust, step 1. Number 2, open an offshore bank account under that trust. If a client's business is facing financial difficulties, how can offshore asset protection help protect their personal assets? So if you're concerned about business liability spilling over into your personal assets, and this is a common concern because corporate veils are pierced frequently, what you can do is get your personal assets secure inside an offshore trust, and then if they attempt to pierce a corporate veil, you can quickly say, hey, you're wasting your time. The assets that I have personally are all protected. If a client is concerned about the safety of their assets offshore, what measures can be taken to ensure they are protected? We can add additional provisions to the trust agreement so that you have a close friend who's a signer on the account, or we can set up an LLC under your trust so that you remain the signer on your account so that funds do not move in or out of an account without your signature. If a client has a high-risk profession, such as a doctor or lawyer, how can offshore asset protection benefit them? Doctors or lawyers are at an increased risk for being hit with a lawsuit. By moving your money offshore, you're going to reduce the chances that somebody brings a lawsuit against you if they know that your money is protected. And if they do bring a lawsuit, there's a better chance that they drop it, or much quicker to take your settlement offer if your assets are moved overseas. If a client has already faced legal action and has not taken steps to protect their assets, is it too late for offshore asset protection? Maybe, maybe not. In certain cases, even with pending litigation, we can still set up an asset protection trust. It definitely works a lot better if you can set up the asset protection trust in advance of any litigation. If a client has a blended family with children from multiple marriages, how can offshore asset protection help ensure their assets are distributed according to their wishes? So as I mentioned, the primary reason people create an asset protection trust is for protection from lawsuits. However, the trust also serves as an estate planning tool and can divide your money between your current spouse and children from current and previous relationships as well. If a client is interested in investing in international real estate, how can offshore asset protection help mitigate risks? So if you want to purchase real estate outside of the United States, you can do that through your offshore trust, and then if you get sued in the U.S., you don't have to worry about that foreign piece of land being forced to be litigated to pay some debt here in the United States. If a client is concerned about having a legacy for their children and future generations, how can offshore asset protection play a role in their estate plan? Your Asset protection trust can also be set up as an estate planning trust as well, so that when you pass away, the money stays out of probate and is passed down to your children and grandchildren, and they get all the same benefits that you have for your own trust, from your own trust. What are some advantages of using Swiss banks for offshore asset protection? I like the Swiss banks, as I mentioned, because they're very stable. You get excellent service. You have access to a wide variety of different investment options. Generally, clients who set up an offshore trust, they do set up a Swiss bank account as well, and with that, we are moving their money to a more stable and secure banking system. How does the Swiss banking system differ from banking systems in other countries? So it's very easy for one country to copy the laws of another country. Control-C, Control-V, copy-paste, boom, you've got the same laws. It's not as easy to have the history, the mindset, the government, the judiciary that stands behind those laws. And if you've ever been to Switzerland, the entire country operates as a well-oiled machine, from the server at the restaurant all the way to the CEO of the biggest bank in Switzerland. It all operates on Swiss time. It's very, very crisp, and there's just a coded into the DNA of Switzerland is this mindset of proper handling of money. Can you explain the process of opening a Swiss bank account and a Cook Islands trust for asset protection purposes? Number one, you retain an attorney. Number two, you sign the trust document. Number three, the trustee signs the trust document. Number four, the trustee will open a bank account in Switzerland at your direction under the trust. Number five, you'll transfer funds into that account. Number six, you'll direct how those funds are invested. And then number seven, anytime you want a distribution, the trustee will send you money provided you are requesting the distribution and the request is not being made under duress. What are some common misconceptions about a Cook Islands trust and asset protection? As I mentioned, the most common misconception about asset protection is only for the super wealthy. That's not true. $1 to $10 million is where most clients sit. Most common misconception about a Cook Islands trust is that it's illegal or used for some type of nefarious activity. No, Cook Islands trusts are totally legal, and this gets right into the next question, which is about tax reporting for offshore clients. Yes, you do report if you have an offshore trust to the government, and we provide a detailed memorandum on everything you need to disclose. Can a Cook Island trust and Swiss bank be used to protect assets other than money, such as artwork or jewelry? Yes, pretty much any asset you own can be protected, typically through a Cook Islands trust. If not, there's some other mechanism to protect pretty much any asset that you own. How do you recommend clients choose a Swiss bank for offshore asset protection? Well, it's going to depend on your level of assets. It's also going to depend on whether you want to work with a smaller or larger bank and the type of assets and type of investment you want to have access to. For example, if you want to put some cryptocurrency into your trust, there is a limited number of Swiss banks which will accept crypto. What are some potential risks or disadvantages of using Swiss banks for asset protection? So I will acknowledge that the Swiss banks, they have an FDIC under a different name. It is lower than the United States. However, they do have it. It is a couple $100,000, maybe around $100,000. But what's more important than having insurance for when a bank fails is having a bank that is less likely to fail. And in Switzerland, the banks are more stable and better regulated than U.S. banks. So there is the lower insurance that you get, but more important than insurance is the level of stability you get with your bank. If a client is concerned about political instability in their home country, how can a Cook Islands trust and a Swiss bank provide asset protection? So lots of reasons to be concerned about political instability in any country in the world right now, and having a diversified plan allows you to make sure that if there is turmoil in your own country, your assets still remain protected. If a client is interested in investing in European markets, how can Swiss banks and Cook Islands Trust facilitate this while providing asset protection? So with a Cook Islands Trust, you get access to all the investment opportunities you have right now, plus some. So you'll have access to even more investments than you do right now. You'll be able to invest in foreign corporations that you're not able to as a U.S. individual. If a client is going through a divorce and wants to protect their assets from their future ex-spouse, how can a Swiss bank and Cook Islands Trust help? A Cook Islands Trust is a helpful tool in negotiating a settlement during a divorce. And by having your money overseas account, such as a Swiss bank account, it does help to keep those assets protected. If a client is a high-profile individual and wants to protect their privacy and assets, how can Swiss banks and Cook Islands Trust provide this level of protection? There's no better privacy than you get with a Swiss bank, and there's no better privacy than you get with a Cook Islands Trust. If you are ever sued, you may be required to report that you have a trust. You can report that the value of the trust is $0 because you are a discretionary beneficiary, but simply because they find out about the trust or they find out about the offshore bank account does not mean they have access to it. It's about protecting the assets. Sometimes the assets are hidden in plain sight. We never lie about what assets we have if we're ordered by a court to disclose that, which typically would not happen until after a judgment has already happened. But if they do find out, it doesn't give them any access to those assets. If a client is concerned about currency fluctuations, how can Swiss banking provide asset protection through diversified currency holdings? When opening up a Swiss bank account, you have the ability to hold your assets in a variety of different currencies, the US dollar, the euro, the Swiss franc. You can hold your money in several different currencies to reduce the risk of currency fluctuation. If a client is interested in charity, how can a Swiss bank or Cook Islands help facilitate charity through offshore giving? Let's scroll to the next question. I've already answered that one just a second ago. If a client has been the target of frivolous lawsuits, can Swiss banks help protect their assets from legal action? Yes, as I mentioned, if somebody sues you and you've legitimately caused harm, I'm going to advise you to make some settlement offer. However, if it is a baloney case, what I'm going to say is tell them to go pound sand. Don't offer to pay anything if it's a frivolous case. If a client wants to protect their assets from potential creditors, how can Swiss banks provide this level of protection? So the Swiss banks will not release funds unless there's a court order from the country which controls the account. So in order to get money out of a Swiss bank, you first have to go to the Cook Islands and get a judgment in the Cook Islands where contingency fees are not allowed. You have to post a hefty bond. You have to win your case beyond a reasonable doubt. This is for a civil matter. In the United States, it requires beyond the reasonable doubt for a criminal matter. It's merely a preponderance of the evidence. 51% to 49%, you win your case in the United States. In order to win a case in the Cook Islands, you have to win by basically a 99.9% standard. It is a very hard standard to meet in the United States. If clients want to ensure their assets are protected for future generations, how can a Cook Islands Trust facilitate this through estate planning strategies? Let's scroll to the next question we've got. What is the CBDC? Central Bank Digital Currency. It's the government's cryptocurrency. There's been a lot of talk and a lot of concern about CBDCs. This could eliminate the cash business, so anyone who's working under the table or doing some illicit activities, they're not going to be able to take payment in cash anymore when cash is eliminated. So I see the CBDC actually being maybe a push towards helping Bitcoin or Monero or some other cryptocurrency. As far as how will the CBDC interact with the Cook Islands Trust, other currencies, other governments will issue their own CBDCs as well, and there will still be places in the world where you can hold cash. And I think the Cook Islands Trust is going to be a tool that allows you, as a U.S. citizen, to still own currency that is not the CBDC. But there's a lot more to still learn about the CBDC. Does not get released until this coming summer when FedNow is released. Is there a tax involved when you shift assets to a Cook Islands Trust? Great question, and the answer is no. You can transfer your stocks over to your Cook Islands Trust and transfer them over in kind. You touched on it, but the best way to protect a primary resident in Florida on 2 acres, incorporated, house-owned, and no mortgage asset strip. So your house, subject to certain limitations, is protected in Florida. For the remaining portion that's not protected, equity strip. Thanks for joining today's live stream. If you have any other questions about asset protection, feel free to give me a call. That's a wrap.